Lester, Chris Jordan, Dean Dutoy, and Michelle Mahoney. The voting members well, let me ask first, is anybody going to disqualify themselves from anything? Nope. Okay. The voting members are as follows: Bunny Tricky Cotton, Jack Deacon, Blake Marcus, Dale Vaughn, Hank Vaught, and Penny Quigg. Everybody will be voting, so we have enough people. Blake, you need to be out of here about 6 o'clock, correct? Okay. We will still have a quorum at that point. Call for cases. We have case number P18016, text amendment to Chapter 3, advertising and signs.
Not yet. So, that's a city staff initiated
So you
proposal, and I will represent that.
Okay. Have we had any requests for continuance?
No.
Okay. Ian, would you please read the format of the hearing and order of testimony?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to briefly describe the procedures of the Commission. The proceedings of this meeting are being recorded, so please step forward to the microphone when you speak and give your name and address for the record. The standard order of each case is as follows. After the introduction of the request by city staff, the applicant or their consultants will provide information on the request. The opening presentation by the applicant shall be limited to 10 minutes unless additional time is granted by the Commission. The applicant shall have 3 additional minutes for closing testimony if requested. We will then ask to hear from supporters of the request. We will then ask to hear from opponents of the request. We will then ask to hear from anyone else who wishes to speak on the request. Testimony shall be limited to 3 minutes unless additional time is granted by the Commission. City staff will make their recommendations on the request. In order to reduce the time necessary to hear an application, references to printed materials, including staff reports and applicable findings, shall not be read into the record unless directed by the Commission. The Commission will close testimony from the floor. The Commission will then discuss the proposal, then publicly make its determination with reasons. The form of the motion shall be positive, that is, the motion shall be made to accept the request as presented or with modifications, stipulations, or conditions. A final vote will be taken with ayes in favor, nays opposed. The chairman shall announce the results of the vote, specifying the number of votes cast in favor and the number of votes cast against. The following documents are entered as exhibits for all items under consideration at this meeting: the City Code of the City of Jefferson as amended, the Comprehensive Plan and Land Use Map, copies of application under consideration, a list of property owners to whom notices were sent, the affidavit of publication of the public notice in the newspaper, copies of drawing, plans, and or renderings under consideration, letters or memoranda from staff, staff reports, minutes of proceedings, correspondence or other materials submitted by the public or the applicant, rules of procedure for the City of Jefferson City Planning and Zoning Commission. These items are public record and available for inspection in the Department of Planning and Protective Services or through the Office of the City Clerk. Please be advised that any items that are presented, distributed, or otherwise received pertaining to the case under consideration become the property of the Commission. This includes any photographs, drawings, petitions, and letters. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it greatly. Can we have a motion to adopt the agenda as printed?
Move to adopt the agenda as printed.
Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Motion carries. We have been provided the minutes by Ann. Take a couple seconds, a couple minutes, read through them if you have any questions or if there are any corrections. Other than that, we need a motion.
Move to approve the minutes as presented.
Second. All in favor? Any opposed? Thank you very much. Communications received.
Ann has passed out the one item of communication is sent by.
Is that communication, I assume?
Yeah,
comment.
I think because it's one of the planning zoning commissioners that I think it emailed the entire body, but we did distribute it, and actually I was going to refer to it in presentation.
Okay. Other new business. Case number P180116, text amendment to Chapter 3, advertising and signs. Mr. Barron, staff report, please.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. So this is a staff-initiated proposal to amend the text of Chapter 3 of the City Code, advertising and signs. It's a very long amendment. Your packet includes a 4-page summary of what's being proposed. Also, the 35-page draft City Council bill. And so I'm hopeful that you've had an opportunity to at least look through the summary, which gives a pretty good overview of the changes. And I'll, in my presentation, give some of the reasoning behind why it's such a lengthy council bill. This item was presented to the Public Works and Planning Committee of the City Council on June 14th. It's just presented as an informational item in front of them because it's the proper procedure for processing is through the Planning and Zoning Commission. One of the reasons for that is the signage regulations are, at least certainly for Jefferson City, heavily rooted, or associated with the zoning code. And so it's largely a zoning matter, and so the proper route is through the Planning and Zoning Commission. Also gives an opportunity for any public comment as this moves forward to the City Council for final review. Up on the screen are 3 items that really outline the purpose of this amendment. I'll show this screen again here in a minute, but the first thing I wanted to say is really the last item there, that the impetus for this was a Supreme Court ruling pertaining to temporary signage. And so in the U.S. Supreme Court, there was a case called Reed versus Gilbert, town of Gilbert, Arizona. Basically is causing cities across the nation to have to look at amendments to their sign code. That case basically ruled, I'll spare all the details, but basically ruled that a city cannot regulate temporary signage based on the message on the sign. So the town of Gilbert had different rules for, say, how big a political sign could be versus how big a regular freedom of speech type of sign could be versus how big other types of signage could be. And Supreme Court basically threw those kinds of regulations out, that they were not not constitutional. Now that ruling really pertains to non-commercial speech or signage. It really wasn't addressing commercial signage. I'll try to describe that a little bit during the presentation as well. So first I wanted to give you a brief overview of what we have on the books right now, what our city code says with regard to temporary signage. And so I have a series of slides here. I won't go over all the details, but basically there's certain size restrictions based on zoning districts for political signs. This is regulation that's in effect today. Regulated different square footage sizes, again based on zoning districts for real estate signs. An outright prohibition of the at least freestanding or temporary signage associated with business commercial signage. And then call them free speech signs, or basically we've processed those in the same way as political signs. But really the point of those slides is to say that our current code is unconstitutional based on the Supreme Court ruling because it regulates different signs based on their message. So we have to amend it. So what can be regulated with respect to signage? Okay, so the message cannot be regulated. You cannot look at the message except for commercial versus non-commercial types of signage. You cannot look at the message and then come up with different regulations based on that. Really what you can can regulate is where the sign is located, whether it's on the property or if it's advertising something off the property, how big the sign is, how many signs there are, what time of the year that is, that, dates, ranges that a sign could be placed, what the design of the sign is, what kind of material it's made out of, and again, whether it's commercial or non-commercial. And so a lot of this is really based around that non-commercial signage that I'm speaking of. So, back to the purpose of this code amendment, why it is before you, and the different, basically I've broken it out into 3 areas that does. So, being as we're opening up Chapter 3 and making some amendments, we felt it proper to try to amend some other things that need to be changed within Chapter 3. So, we've basically are reorganizing a major portion of the chapter. The last overhaul of the sign code was done in 2011, and so we've identified various things since then, basically, that probably need to be changed, and are proposing those changes where they're appropriate. And so, first, and I'll go over each one of these items independently within the presentation. And so first, the technical amendments. And so it is a complete reorganization of Article 1 of the sign code. We're deleting it and then reestablishing a new Article 1, basically reorganizing the entire thing. The article, it was kind of weak in some of the purpose and intent and some of the permit processing sections. And so we went through and did a complete rewrite of it, organizing it in a little bit better manner. But basically, the content of the chapter is the same, except for the changes that are identified in the 4-page staff report, where we identify the different changes and things that I speak of tonight. So, some of the changes. Major ones at least, of movement of the C3, the downtown commercial signage. So signage used to be, the signage allowance for a property used to be based on the frontage or road frontage of the property. Back in 2011, that was switched over to a largely facade-based calculation for building-mounted signage, and then a different calculation for freestanding signage. That was done for all zoning districts except the downtown commercial district, so it's kind of standing alone. And so we felt it proper to move that over into a facade-based signage allowance so that it's the same as all the other zoning districts in town. And also, we're proposing raising the maximum height for building-mounted signs from 32 feet up to 50 feet. The reasoning for that is we've processed a number of variance situations, basically, on building-mounted signage over the years. I counted 5. Which is a fairly large number as variances go, and so felt it proper to just go ahead and raise that limit up rather than continue to push property owners in a variance situation where that building mounted signage is above 32 feet. In most of the cases that was looked at, it really didn't have a large impact. The maximum height for a freestanding sign would still be 32 feet, so pole signs are not being affected by that. And then temporary signage. So this is the bulk of the amendments. So the bill would remove the various allowances for temporary signs based on message and replace it with a non-message based allocation. And signage would be the signage allowance for a property would be granted basically on these 3 different features: the type of sign, the location where it is, and the manner in which it's being placed. So I have visual examples of each of those. And so first, the type of sign. Regulating basically, so for commercial areas, regulating Yeah, commercial versus non-commercial. So signs that are displaying a commercial message. So here's an example of various businesses that are advertised on yard signs. Here's an example of a banner placed in front of a business that is advertising, commercial message there. And so that would fall into one type of category. And then non-commercial signs. So this is basically a freedom of speech sign is what we usually refer to it as. Here's a row of political signs. And we're actually placing real estate signs into the non-commercial category, although many people would think a real estate sign is advertising a commercial message. The real estate signs are different, and that's acknowledged within some of the case law and opinions by attorneys, in that they're basically required in order to advertise a property. And so they do not fit within the normal commercial signage, so we're actually placing a real estate type of sign into the non-commercial category and giving it all the same rights in terms of placement and size, etc., as those non-commercial messages. Okay, so then the manner of placement, really building mounted versus freestanding. So again, here's an example of a banner that's placed on a building, and so that would be one type of category that, again, based on the different districts would be allowed or not, whereas it would be a different type of regulation for a banner being placed in the yard. And then window signage is addressed within the proposal, and freestanding yard signs are again not attached to the building. So here is the basic overview of what would be allowed, and I break it down by zoning district. And so first dealing with the commercial districts. And so I break it down within commercial districts, commercial signage and non-commercial signage, and then a few exceptions there at the bottom. So in terms of commercial signage, a building or a property, would be allowed 50 square feet of temporary signage mounted to the building. Also, 50% of the window space of the building could be basically covered up with signage. Okay. And in terms of freestanding signs, the signs or banners that would be placed in the yard area in front of the building, they would not be permitted. That's again, today the rules that are on the books within Chapter 3 today do not permit those freestanding signs. For non-commercial signage, a business could use any of this commercial signage for non-commercial types of messages, but in terms of straight non-commercial signage, they would be allowed one sign per street frontage with the maximum size of 25 square feet. And then during the election season, which is defined within the definition section, they would get 2 additional signs per street frontage, each of them a maximum of 32 square feet. The 2 exceptions that are listed here at the bottom are sandwich board signs. They would be allowed, so they're technically a freestanding sign. Well, they are a freestanding sign, not technically, they are. But many strip malls and such with individual tenants will have these out in front of their door. And then also in the downtown district, you'll see them on the sidewalk. And so they would be allowed as a freestanding sign. In the downtown district, well, in both cases, they'd have to be located within a certain distance of the front door. But in the downtown district in particular, they'd have to be located basically adjacent to the side of the building and in a manner that's not interfering with the walkway, the sidewalk. And then the next exception is banners at major intersections. And so here I have a picture, and that is, I believe that might be the only picture within Jefferson City that I have within my presentation. All other signs, I try not to use examples from this town, but here is a picture of a sign at a major intersection here in Jefferson City. It's advertising basically a community event type of thing. These are very popular signs, I believe. You'll see them located at major intersections around town quite frequently. So we've attempted to incorporate that allowance within the sign code. Now the thing is, though, is that we really cannot regulate the message on the sign. You basically have to allow it to broadcast even commercial messages. So you're granting that corner property some commercial freestanding temporary signage. But in practice, I think that that's usually used for those community event type of messages. So in the residential districts, again, divided based on commercial and non-commercial signage with some exceptions. For commercial signage, it would not be permitted. The only exception is for schools, apartments, and churches, which are kind of dealt with separately within the sign code and granted some signage. Non-commercial signage, and each property would be granted 2 small signs, 5 square foot, basically a yard sign per property, and then during election season, 2 additional signs per street frontage. So a corner lot located in a residential district could have 6 signs. Any other lot, just a regular lot on a street, could have 4 political signs, basically during political season. So this is an excellent time of the year to be able to look around town and see how many property owners would actually meet that. And at the end of this, I have the question to see, basically asking if those numbers are appropriate, or if they need to be raised or lowered or anything. There's one exception listed, and that's signs during construction, where a property owner has a construction permit, a building permit active. They'd be allowed to have some commercial signage, which is usually the business or the construction company that's doing the work. They feel that that's necessary in order to advertise that there's construction work taking place on the property. This is the location where employees report to work and such, and deliveries for equipment and things. There is one thing that we've incorporated into the proposal, and that is a setback for temporary signs. It's something that does not exist today. So right now, a property owner cannot place a temporary sign on the public right-of-way, the street right-of-way. And many property owners don't realize that their property line does not go all the way to the street. That there's usually about a 10 or 15 foot area of their yard that's technically public right-of-way. Oftentimes signs get placed within that. It can also be very difficult to establish where that property line is, where that right-of-way line is, especially for a code enforcement officer trying to keep signs out of the right-of-way. So we thought that it might be appropriate to try to incorporate a different way of trying to make sure that signs do not encroach on the street too much. And what we came up with was a setback requirement from the side of the street or the curb. 5 feet for the residential districts and 10 feet for the commercial districts. The property owners would still not be able to place signs on the right-of-way, but as I said, it can be very difficult for a code enforcement officer to know where that line is. It would be very easy for them to measure a distance from the side of the road and to inform the property owner that they at least need to move the sign back to that line. Flags are also dealt with within the proposal. Flags are a form of signage, even flags that represent nations, such as the American flag. For the commercial industrial districts, what would be permitted is basically 3 flags for a property. They would have to be either mounted on flagpoles or mounted to the side of a building. What would not be permitted is, we refer to these as advertising flags or feather flags. Our flagpole, very short ones that are located in the yard, would not be permitted. For the residential districts, a property could have 2 flags with basically no height requirement on the pole, so they could put it as a small pole in the yard. What would not be permitted, what would be prohibited, is the very tall flagpoles. And so we actually did some research in terms of making sure that the size of the flag is appropriate. So that basically looking at national standards for display of the American flag and incorporating those types of recommendations into the code. So there's a lot of information contained within the sign code proposal that's in front of you. I'd be happy to try to answer any questions that you have regarding it. The 2 main items that I have the most concern about, and Mr. Lester in his email that I said I was going to refer to, actually hit the nail on the head, so to speak, in terms of the major concerns about this is, I think, is these 2 points. First, the number of signs that would be permitted for a property. Again, it's election season right now. You can go out and you can see properties that have a lot of signs on them. Is that appropriate or not? Is that something that the city would, is really in, is it a problem? Does it need to be regulated? As the code is right now, I do not believe that there's any way that the city could limit the number of political signs in a yard. So if someone were to literally fill their yard up with signs to make a point or otherwise, I don't think that there's anything legally that could be done to address that, and it would certainly have a pretty high level of visual impact for an area. So some sort of number would probably be appropriate. Whether that number is 2 signs per property plus 2 per street frontage, for a total of 6 for a corner lot, or some other number is really the question I was hoping that you could discuss. Mr. Lester references that his preference would be a signage calculation based on linear feet along the street. We looked at that. We did not like that method because that would grant a different number of signs for every property. And we felt that a straight number is a lot easier to communicate to the public rather than each property being different. And so the staff preference is to kind of nail it down with a maximum number of signs and leave it at that. The second thing is the setback. Again, Mr. Lester refers to that in his email as well, so I kind of wish he was here to discuss as well. But it's something new. If you go out there and look, there's all sorts of political signs right up by the curb. In some cases, they're on the right of way. In some cases, property lines go right up to that curb line. My property happens to be right up against the curb. And so a concern there that it might be creating some sort of false expectation that the city is going to go out there and enforce this and make sure that every property owner in town doesn't have political signs right up against the curb. Well, that would be more than a full-time job right now. But at the same time, if there was a setback requirement, that would be something easy to relate to candidates and such, and try to keep these signs away from the road and keep the town a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, as the signs right up against the road tend to be a bit of an aesthetic concern. That is my presentation. I apologize for it being a fairly long one. I'd be happy to answer any questions you have, and it is a public hearing item, and so the public hearing does need to be opened. The role of the Planning and Zoning Commission is to make a recommendation on this and forward that recommendation on to the City Council. With that, again, happy to answer any questions.
Eric, first of all, I think you should strike the advertising flags, the type you see along used car lots. I don't have any problem with that. I mean, it's kind of a nice visual effect sometimes. And most importantly, I don't think we should have any regulation whatsoever on the political season. If they want to fill it up, go for it. I mean, that's almost like trying to regulate Christmas. You do it once every couple of years. If they want to have the dancing cowboys on the air show there, golly, I mean, go for it. I mean, I don't care. I think planning and zoning, I think the code enforcement has more important things to do than every couple of years see how far the signs are. If they want to fill it up, God bless them when the heavy grass season comes. I don't know how they're going to mow around it, but I'd say just let them alone. The others I don't have any problem with. I do have a problem with any kind of regulation on the political signs other than a sight problem along the streets. But come on, give them a break. I mean, it's like a carnival with, there truly is some freak shows in there too. Thank you.
Anybody else got any questions for Eric?
Have you had complaints about signage? A lot of signs in people's yards.
Quite often,
Really? They complain
Yes.
quite a bit.
yes.
is it specifically political, or is it real estate signs, or?
It can be commercial stuff, especially if signage enforcement is a continuing thing, and so if it waxes, if it doesn't occur for a little while, is what I'm getting at, is and so a number of properties have it displayed, we start to get more calls in from people. In residential areas, we do get concerns about signs as well. Sometimes the size of the sign can be an issue. Other times it's just that it's a sign in their neighborhood and not happy about it.
If so, during political season, this number, or the way it's set up now, would be 4 signs total. Is that basically the way?
4 for a typical property, 6 for a corner lot.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think 4 would be silly. You can have multiple candidates in multiple parties. I mean, all the way through. I mean, how are you going to pick your 4 best friends? I mean, once again, let the political signs be. Come on, once every couple of years, like fireworks. Let us have our tradition.
Anybody else?
Is there a time frame for political signs? Like, is there like a month grace, like they're allowed a certain amount of time?
It's within the definition section. 60 days prior to and 5 days after an election. I mean, again, we can't regulate the message. So what it does is it grants the property those signs during that time period. They can use them for whatever non-commercial purpose they want. But yeah, typically it's political signs.
Thanks.
So.
Anybody else? Okay, I have a question. I have actually 2 for you, and they're
Okay.
kind of interrelated. How did the United Way signs, the 4x8 United Way signs, fall out?
They're just another temporary sign.
What about the Christmas signs in people's yards?
Another temporary sign.
Okay.
Save the whales, another temporary sign. Bald guys and beards, another temporary sign.
Hey, now be careful. Watch that.
It's one of my favorite things.
And my other question was about, you were talking about window signs, Eric.
Yes.
What's the purpose of limiting if one of the business wants to plaster their windows for a 1-week sale? Is it so you can't see in, so you can't see out? Do you find it offensive? What are we looking at?
Well, 2 purposes there. First, under the current code, the window signage is included within the property's allowable signage. Okay, so technically, if a property maxes out their business sign in terms of its size, it contacts the city and says, how big can it be? We give them a number, they make it that big, and then comes in and places window signage, they're in violation of sign code. I'm not particularly fond of that, and so I think many other people are not either, so there needs to be a change. Second, there are some businesses out there with very large windows, and if they plaster their windows with signs, it will have very large visual impact on the area. This limits it to some extent. That's the purpose for 50%. I don't know that there's a whole lot out there that would actually exceed 50% right now.
I can think of a couple up and down the boulevard that do with some frequency.
I can think of one or two that I think
One's seasonal.
exceeded.
One tends to be seasonal around Halloween or Christmas.
Yes.
Okay. No other questions at this point? So we're supposed to open this public hearing, correct?
Yes, open public hearing.
Okay, let's open the public hearing. And is there anyone that would like to speak in favor of this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone here that would like to speak in opposition of this request? Seeing none. Is there anyone here who just wants to say something about this request? Seeing none. Okay. We'll close testimony at this point. Eric, anything else you want to add, sir?
No, just be happy to answer any questions, and when it comes around to trying to move it forward with proper motion, I can add to that.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not comfortable with voting on all of it. I am some of it, but there's even, I haven't even discussed the flagpole, the height of them. And, you know, if they want to get way up there, just watch the airplanes. But some of it I can do. But personally, right now, I'm not ready to vote on the entire package. If you want to put them some out there, that just the reorganization, I'm fine with that. But right now, I'm not comfortable at all voting with the flagpole height, and I'm not comfortable. Well, I'm comfortable voting with the political signs, but I don't want that lumped in with everything else. I would like to see that one separate. But that's I don't know how you do that, but I think it's just too much for us to digest and send all to the city council all at once. There's a lot in there.
Anybody else have any comments or questions for Eric? Or any of staff, I should say, not just Eric. We can pick on any of them. It's okay. No other questions? Anybody want to make a motion?
I will try to address some of
Okay.
Mr. Deacon's concern. I don't know if I can address them all. Again, we've tried to keep this proposal as close as possible to what the sign code says today, while also cleaning up certain areas that are unclear or weak within the code. We do not consider it to be a major overhaul of the sign code, except for the section regarding temporary signs. And the section for temporary signs really has to be done for legal reasons. That the code needs to be changed in some manner. And so we've tried to, in our research on what other cities have done and other things that have been tested within the courts already and have been successful, we tried to mimic that. We're fairly comfortable with, of course, we interact with these issues on a day-to-day basis and have tried to draft it in a way that's going to be accommodative of property. So the maximum height of a pole or a flag is pretty high, but so there's still some fairly tall poles that could be put in, but what it prevents is the I'll use the word obtrusive, the things that fall way out of the norm is really what we're trying to make sure does not occur. And so you might think of it as addressing 99% of the issues out there, where that 1% of the issues is a pretty major concern. We have not tried to draft it in a way that we feel is overly regulatory. There are two items up on the screen that could be. Those are really the two items that we have the most concern about. Other than that, we've tried to put it in a good spot, and we realize that it's a lot of information, and can certainly go through it line by line. But in general, that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to put it in a good spot for consideration by you and the council.
I got a question. you see cell phone towers that are flag poles, is that gonna, what's that considered? Is that a cell phone tower?
No, they're really separate. Yeah, those are regulated separately because they're kind of a special approval process.
So the form of motion that you're looking at is to adopt the signage code the way that it's written? Is that the motion that you're looking for?
So my recommendation would be for a motion for, for approval or for a positive recommendation to the city council with any amendments that the Planning and Zoning Commission felt necessary. Or if none, then just a straight positive recommendation to the council.
Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, I would like to somehow amend it and leave the political signs out of any type of harm's way, however you want to. I know there has to be some safety concerns with the driving and pedestrians, but somehow I'd like to see a motion made, or how would you do it, to remove the temporary political signs out of any type of regulation, number or number.
When I think to do that, I think it's not just the political signs, it's all temporary. So Christmas, anything, yeah, okay.
So I have given that some thought. If that is, I at a staff level still feel that there should be some sort of cap. Okay, again, trying to address 99% of it and avoid that 1% of truly obtrusive situations. And so the way that would be accomplished is by putting a very high number, 10, 15 or so signs for a residential property, just, a number that, no normal situation would approach.
Well, if we get into a year where there's a lot of races, both on the national, state, and local level, and a lot of primaries, I mean, there's a lot of people. I would say, like the old speed limit used to be, sane and sensible.
Just keep in mind that the message cannot be regulated. It can be the most offensive message you could imagine placed on 100 signs on a property.
We've always had that, though. I mean, you'd be also regulating Christmas. You could have it, well, if you want 25 little Christmas Carol signs there, and you say, well, that's 3 too many. No, I think it's unregulated. The only people that get upset is the neighbors, and they're probably not getting along well with that neighbor anyway, so it's just one more thing.
So if Jack wants to add the amendment, do we vote on that separately, or how do we do that? I mean, my
So-
not to discount Jack's. Go ahead. Sorry.
How that would go procedurally, if Jack made the motion to send a recommendation for approval with the amendment that we place no cap on temporary signs during the election season, or no cap on temporary signs, period, then that would be the motion. You wouldn't have to vote on the amendment and then vote on the actual thing. So we need a second.
If I personally don't agree with that amendment, then I would be voting no.
Correct.
So then we don't go anywhere after that.
Well, someone else can make a different motion if that one
Okay,
goes down.
That's my point.
Or it could fail for lack of a second. I mean, there's always that as well.
The way I prefer to move forward is to do the initial thing and then tack on any amendments, as a separate item. That's my preference. The body can proceed as it wishes, though.
Don't you, as Robert's rules, where you have to make your amendment, vote on your amendment, and then move forward? But I'm not sure we follow Robert's rules of order, do we? Okay, you want to try to, I don't want to be argumentative, but I think we're supposed to, doesn't Robert's Rule of Order, you would vote on an amendment, you'd make an amendment, and then vote on it, and then take it to the whole motion and move it forward?
That's correct if that's what happened. But for example, if Jack made if Jack's original motion was that the recommendation be to approve with the amendment to the proposed ordinance that there be no limit on temporary signs. That would in itself be the motion. Versus, let's say Blake made a motion to send this forward with a recommendation, that was seconded, and then there was an amendment.
To that
To
motion.
that, yes.
Okay.
That's when we get into that messy Robert's Rules of Order, last in, first out,
Okay.
goofy stuff.
Jack, you gonna make a motion?
I don't do this very often. I'll make a motion that we send it on to the council minus the restriction on temporary signs.
For clarification, is that only for residential properties or for
Yeah,
resident?
for residential properties.
Okay. And also for clarification, that's for the number, not the size,
Number
just the number.
of signs per house, temporary signs.
For political seasons,
Political seasons, yes. Well, you can't do that. It's Christmas also. Christmas isn't a political season. You're also regulating Christmas if you're regulating
so
the
to
number of temporary signs.
so
Counselor?
to change the bill so that there's no limit on 5 square foot temporary signs in terms of number on a residential property.
Correct.
And is it just number, or does that include this? We're okay with the setback in that motion, right? I'm sorry.
I would say, don't worry about the setback, but then you run into safety concerns, so I don't know how they want to do with the safety. You have to deal with the highway department.
I have a thought on that. And there's a real clear calculation that you can do on sight distance from an engineering point of view. And as long as it doesn't affect sight distance, and that's an easy thing to calculate.
And we do have some language in there, if I recall correctly, that deals with site distance. So if it's a site issue, then it's dealt with separately. If the body wants to strike the setback entirely, that's fairly easy to incorporate.
From the sight distance, you can enforce the sight distance.
Yeah, site distance is separate, and we would still enforce that. We can enforce that today. So.
Yes, ma'am.
So can we have the motion restated? We've kind of,
Okay. Do you want to try to do this?
I'll take a crack at it.
Okay.
And then if Mr. Deacon agrees, it's a motion for recommendation for approval of the proposal, with the exception that there be no limit on the temporary signs for residential properties in terms of number.
And setback? That's a question?
And setback.
Okay. Did you get that one, Penny?
I did. Where I would second his motion.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Any further discussion?
Thank you. Keep me straight. Any further discussion? Okay. All in favor? All opposed?
Let me do a roll
Okay.
real quick. Okay.
Because you're going to do it anyway.
Yeah, I'm gonna do it anyway. Bunny Tricky Cotton. Jack Deacon. Blake Marcus. Dale Vaughn. Hank Vogt. And Penny Quigg. Passes 5-1.
Okay. So the motion passes 5-1. We'll go from there.
And so this item will be forwarded to the City Council with the Planning and Zoning Commission's recommendations. It will appear in front of the City Council for a public hearing. The date of that public hearing would be August 20th at 6 p.m. here in this room.
Thank you, sir, very much. And that's it for new business, correct? All right, so we're going to other business. Anna is going to discuss Sunset McKay Court rezoning, correct?
That's correct. Okay. So, this one. Sorry, guys, not used to this quite yet. So, as mentioned in the last Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, that I'm focused on long-range planning and looking at if there's any needed updates to our zoning map kind of falls under that umbrella. And so planning is like always evolving, so anything that we bring up does not mean that past planning decisions were incorrect. It's just like very normal to update the zoning map as the city grows or as economic and social preferences change. So I'm going to talk about a staff-initiated rezoning for Sunset Court. And so first, for a little bit of context, here's the area. It is just south of McKay Park and right off of Highway 54, Southwest Boulevard and South Ridge Drive, or Route C. That's the nearest intersection, major intersection. Okay. So we are proposing to rezone this from RD to RS4, and it includes this area of Sunset Court and the properties just east of McKay Street. Now, RD is a residential duplex area, medium residential density, and so then, like I said, we're suggesting to rezone it to RS4. And this area was rezoned from RS2 to the RSD district that it is now in 1976, and the whole subdivision was then established in 1990. And staff believes that this area should be RS4 to preserve the residential character of the neighborhood. So right now, anyone here could change their property to a duplex. It's completely allowed. But we would really like to see this area be more representative of what is actually there, which is all currently single-family residential. The changing of this rezoning will have very little effect on the neighbors, except for the fact that duplexes aren't allowed. Everything else is pretty much the same. So yeah, ultimately this just preserves the single-family character. We will be formally presenting this on the August 9th Planning and Zoning Commission meeting, and we're going to have an open house for the area on July 31st, which will allow any residents to come and speak on the matter. Thank you. I can answer any questions that you might have.
It's all single family right now, isn't it?
It's all single family.
Right, and there's one lot, I think, at the end of the cul-de-sac left. Is that a city lot?
Yes.
That lot right next down?
Yes, so
Yeah.
there's a property right here that is vacant.
Yeah.
That will be included in here.
Is that owned by the city?
No, it is not owned by the city. I believe it has an easement smack dab through the middle of it, and that's why it hasn't not been built on. I think it's a private easement, access easement, right through the middle of the lot.
Well, that's this property back here.
I'm sorry, yeah. So there's the vacant lot, I believe, at the end of McKay Court, but then, yes, there is a square of property there that's owned by the water company, Missouri American. There was an unsuccessful proposal as a Board of Adjustment case to put a water tower there many years ago.
Not within these boundaries right here. There, it is all single-family homes.
I think the nearest multifamily property is probably the apartments that front on Sunset Lake. And so the short description is that this area is zoned incorrectly.
Anybody else for Anna? Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, Eric?
Eric, Southside rezoning number 1.
Oh, no, I don't like that. Well, it depends. Okay, so I've presented this item to you a number of times in the initial adoption of the plan. So the Southside Old Munichburg Neighborhood Plan is a formally adopted component of the city's comprehensive plan dealing with the area the old Munichburg area and surrounding neighborhood, essentially. There's a number of land use recommendations within that plan. This is the land use map, basically the recommended land use map that is contained within that plan. And so it outlines what the land use really should be for that area. And so there's the various colors and the key over there. But in general, there's a number of areas that are basically that are zoned incorrectly, or that the plan recommends different zoning strategies. And so now that the plan is formally adopted, we're moving forward with implementation of the plan. There's a lot of different things contained within the plan that fall within multiple departments of the city and even organizations outside the city. There's parks recommendations within the plan, some street recommendations, but the land use recommendations are really the ones that the Planning and Zoning Division of the city is focused on. And so we have identified basically 5 areas that need zoning actions to take place according to the plan. And so they're shown up on the screen, not in any particular order, except that number 1 right there is the one that we would discuss first, and that's the one I'm presenting in front of you. Now, back in April, I presented an idea on the concept of expanding the first rezoning area to incorporate some more area, and since kind of backtracked or backpedaled from that idea. But this is the area that we proposed for rezoning, and so I have this line drawn up on top of that recommended land use map. I'll show you a land use map and a zoning map here after that. But basically incorporates a lot of the area that's recommended for single-family zoning and largely is in use as single-family residential today. To be rezoned to single family. It's zoned to multifamily right now, an RA2 district. There's a few deviations from the plan, which I'll point at. One is this very light or maroon type of color is the designation for single family, and so I'd like to say that the entire area that we're proposing for rezoning is that color, except there's this small area up here, which the plan calls out as parkland, but it's currently in use as single-family residential, and again, currently zoned multifamily residential. So we feel that a downstepping of that area from multifamily to single-family is really necessary. And then if there is ever a future park plan to put in place for that area up there, that then potentially could go from there. Also, there's the line that we decided to draw for this first rezoning ends right here. There is a church located on this corner property right here. Is it church? And so we feel that that's an appropriate spot for the boundary of the district for the first rezoning. And then there's 2 notches in the area right here and here, and I'll get to those here in a second when I get to the land use map. But basically proposing that those remain zoned multifamily. And so this is the land use map that we've put together. And so to describe the different colors here, first you see the blue area outlined here. And so we've mapped the land use where all the green properties are single family homes, currently in use as single family. The red ones are buildings that were originally built, or at least appear to be originally built as single-family homes, but have since been converted into multiple units, usually 2 units, sometimes 3. And then there's a variety of other colors. The blue ones, for example, right there, that is a structure that was built as a 2-family structure. So it's a duplex that was built as a duplex, not a conversion. And the pink is triplex, and then we get into some apartment complexes with the various other colors. But for the most part, everything contained within the blue line here is either single family or properties that were originally built as single family but converted to multiple units at some time in the past. The 2 notches over here that I referenced are fourplexes, so 4-unit buildings. One of them, I believe, may have been a home at one time, but since converted into multiple units. Another one appears to be have been built perhaps as a duplex and then converted to 4. But there's a reason they would not be included, and that is if this entire area is rezoned from its existing RA2 category, and so here's the zoning map with that blue line drawn on top, so it's all zoned RA2. If rezoned from RA2 down to a RS4, a single-family residential district, all of the properties, the red ones identified here, would be grandfathered in. They could continue to exist as a 2-unit or multiple unit structure until such time as they are either voluntarily converted to single family or voluntarily demolished. The zoning code, even if they were to burn down or be destroyed by natural causes, they could be rebuilt as a 2-unit structure, because the zoning code has a protection in place for 2-unit structures. This is very important, especially for financing property. If you're going to buy a property and get a loan on it, the bank wants to make sure that investment is protected, and if it is destroyed, that it can be rebuilt. So the zoning code protects 1 and 2-unit structures, but does not extend that protection on up to higher numbers of units. And so a 4-unit building, if rezoned to single family, would be a different situation. It would still be grandfathered in terms of it could continue to exist. But if it were destroyed by natural causes, it could not be rebuilt. And that would be a very major deal for the property owner, because when it came time to sell that property, the new owner would have a very difficult time getting financing. So we feel it's necessary to notch those 2 spots out in order to not create a non-conforming situation for at least those 2 properties, but all the others would be protected by that grandfathering, that non-conforming clause. So our plan would actually be to hold a neighborhood meeting, so we'd send out letters to the neighborhood, give them an opportunity to come in and meet with city staff and hear basically the long version of the presentation of why this area is being proposed for rezoning, what that means for their property. And then bring it forward to the Planning and Zoning Commission a short time after that for formal presentation and public hearing in front of that body. In other words, this is something that is recommended by the plan. It's a rezoning proposal that we feel needs to move forward. And then after P&Z, bring it on to the City Council in the normal manner. And it would be a special meeting. So there's a reason I have the word special here underlined. And so because of budget meetings, we are not guaranteed a spot in this room. Budget meetings take place at the same time as Planning and Zoning Commission meetings, and so we are often kicked out of this room and sent across the hall to the smaller room. When dealing with a major rezoning proposal involving literally approximately 100 properties, we feel we need to make sure that we have the proper venue. And the only way to ensure that is either delay the case for several months, which we prefer not to do. We'd like to see the implementation of this plan move forward. And so therefore, we're hoping that you'd be receptive to the calling of a special meeting. We've not polled the membership to see if that is a date that would be available for them. We're hoping that, being as it's more than a month out, that there would be enough members in order to hold the meeting on that date. With that, I'd be happy to answer any question. There's no action to be taken by the Planning and Zoning Commission. Certainly like to hear what you have to say. And barring any major objection, this is the plan that we would move forward with.
Eric, on the single-family homes that have been converted to two apartments, if they're sold, is it sold as a single family, or can stay converted to 2 apartments?
No, it retains its rights, basically.
All the way through. So
yeah.
It'll always be.
So if you own it and you sell it to someone, then they can continue to operate it in exactly the same way. It's only when it's voluntarily converted back to single family, or if it's torn down voluntarily, and then when you rebuild it, it'd have to be single family. Or if it's destroyed by fire and you don't do anything with it for at least 1 year. So the protection only extends 1 year out for cases where it's damaged by natural causes.
Is there going to be pizza at this special meeting?
You know, it's not a matter to take lightly, because it is, like I said, about 100 properties. So there's 100 owners out there. 150, Ian tells me. I wish we had money for pizza. But it's, so I think when described to people, I think they'll understand it. When someone gets a letter that the city's going to rezone their property, all manner of things will flow through their head. But I think when described the situation on how it came to be, I think that people will understand and see that the multifamily zoning of this area is really not necessarily done it a whole lot of favors. The changing of a single building on a street to multiple units has an impact on the rest of the street. And so we're hoping to reverse some of that.
Is that room going to be able to hold? I mean, it's going to be open to the public? Is it going to be separate, I guess?
So the neighborhood meeting would likely take place in this room. And then the reason we'd have to call a special meeting is to ensure that we can get this room.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I thought we were.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anybody else? Hey, Eric, could you go back about 2 slides? That one right there. Thank you. You talked about the 2 properties, and I can't read those 2. Yes, sir. What about the one up north? No. Now go west. Keep going west. That one right there.
So that's the same reason now, going back one more slide, that was recognized within the boundary. So when I presented this to the Planning and Zoning Commission, it's a very short thing at the end of a long meeting, I believe it was, back in April, we were looking at the idea of actually including much of this area in a single family rezoning, even though the plan calls out multifamily. The reason is we look at the land use map and we see a lot of green in that area, okay? But we also see a lot of these other, multifamily uses. And so we've kind of backtracked on that and felt that following this plan is really the most appropriate thing that we can do at this point. If something needs to take place in that area, it's really a plan amendment at that point, separate discussion. But that was identified as being, right across the street from existing stuff, so that's shown in the plan as multifamily.
It just didn't fit our nice straight lines that we like to ask about.
Yes, I understand. Ideally, land use on both sides of a street would be the same. An example of that is this street right here, where they're the same on both sides. I realize that zoning lines down the middle of the street we try to avoid them, but it is what is being proposed in these 2 cases right here.
Okay, that was just, why don't we have a straight line? All right, any other questions? Are you going to update us on prior cases?
I will. There were 4 short-term rental Airbnb type situations presented to the city council, and they were all approved. Also, those were special exception permits, and also the special exception permit for the Josh Cordy Tree Service. Thank you. Across the river over in Old Cedar City was approved. So. The School Street Local Historic District is scheduled for a public hearing in front of the City Council on Monday evening, and that will take place at 6 p.m. here in this room.
So we encourage everybody to attend.
Certainly, yes.
Okay, anything else for us?
I think I didn't have it on this list, but elections.
Election of officers, we are due.
I think we should wait till we have a full body here, and,
We can do that.
you know,
We can
That's-
sure do that. Okay.
Correct.
we can make, I'll make a motion, we keep it as the same. I mean, maybe
Mr.
Chris.
Jordan is acceptable. He has
Is-
made that statement.
Okay, all right.
And
I
I'll
would-
second that motion.
All right.
Okay, all in favor? Any opposed? Motion passes. And at this point, I think we're adjourned. Thank you all very much.
Thank you all.